Hey, Beam Me Up Pod fans, can you believe we are knocking on the door of 2 years as a podcast, and we're coming up on our 100th episode? And to celebrate, we are doing something we've never done before here at Beam Me Up, a Star Trek podcast. We're doing a giveaway. Matt, I am so excited about this giveaway that folks out there have a chance to win.
Well, Brent, you should be, because you can win a Star Trek replica tridimensional 3D chess set. This is a fantastic prize that I would love to have in my office. So let's check it out. If you head over to beammeupgiveaway.com, you'll find the entry form over there. And there are multiple ways to enter. You can follow us on Twitter. That's, of course, you can only do once. But then there are 4 other methods of entry that you can complete every single day. You can come back and gain more and more entries. You can visit us on Instagram. You can visit us on Facebook, visit our YouTube page, or even visit our website. Each of these will gain you additional entries every day.
So listen, guys, go over to beammeupgiveaway.com. You'll find all the ways. You guys go every day. You can enter every day, multiple ways, get multiple entries, and increase your odds of winning this fantastic. This isn't a little teeny tiny mini chess set. Like, each of the pieces is 1.5 inches tall, and the whole thing is huge. Like, this is an amazing thing you want, especially as a Star Trek fan. So you guys go out there, do that. Beam Me Up giveaway. Matt, the only problem I have with this whole thing is you and I cannot win it. So you guys go do that. beammeupgiveaway.com.
The final frontier begins.
This is about saving the future of humanity.
This is a huge victory for the good guys.
You've never seen Voyager.
Commitment to this course of action is not emotional.
Scotty, beam us up.
Welcome to another episode of Beam Me Up, a Star Trek podcast. I am Brent Allen, and I have seen every episode of Star Trek 47 times.
And I'm Matt Sonnenberg, and this is my first time through the series.
And this is the show where we are on a mission to introduce people to the universe of Star Trek by watching the most important episodes. Not just the good ones, but the important episodes that deal with the lore, the history, and the timeless message that is Star Trek.
But before we get into that, we want to make sure that you go and leave a rating and review for this show. We love it when people do that. We even sometimes think about reading them on the air. I don't know if we've ever actually done that before, but it's something we might do. So if you want the possibility of possibly having your review read on the air, you should go leave us one so we can read it. I promise we'll read it regardless. Maybe not on the air, but we'll read it. You can do that at beammeupod.com or over on Apple or on Podchaser. It's up to you.
For the record, Matt, we have read those on the air before, usually in what an episode we call Answering the Hails is where but who knows, maybe we'll transfer it to actually one of our main episodes instead of doing Answering the Hails as they come in. Go leave reviews, people, because it helps other people know that we're a good podcast and better than the other ones that claim to be one. And yeah, do it. We would love you for it. Thank you so much. Today's episode is the 10th episode of season 2 of Star Trek Voyager, the first episode we're doing from season 2, entitled Maneuvers, or as I like to call it, Seska gets a bun in the oven. Chakotay's bun. In case you didn't watch this one first, in this episode, the Kazon Nistrum steal a bit of Federation technology with aid of former Maquis crew member Seska. Matt, we're going to get into all the Wither 2s and Y4s and all the little bits and bobs, but before we do that, you watch this episode for the very first time. Maneuvers. You said something to me a few minutes ago that shocked me a little bit, but I'll give you a chance. Overall thoughts and reactions to this episode, 10,000 feet high.
Well, every time you say Star Trek Maneuvers, it sounds like a new video game. I don't know why. Anyway, overall thoughts on this episode, it's definitely not what I expected. I know it's been a while since we've been with Voyager, but already we're seeing another sect of the Kazon, I believe, or, well, no, more of them, I guess. We've seen the one of them already, if I recall.
We've seen the Kazon Ogla, and we saw them in the first one.
Okay.
And then we saw the Kazon Nistrum, who we have here now.
Yes, because we've seen Kula before.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And in this particular episode, we got
3 more.
4 new Kazon names at least.
Yeah.
Kazon segments. Yeah.
Yeah. All sorts of Kazon. So it's kind of blowing my mind how often we're coming back to them, because it is what I've at least determined to be, and I think maybe you confirmed at one point, kind of the big bad of Voyager. And So I'm surprised how often we're seeing them as compared to what it has usually been. Like the Borg, like maybe we didn't watch every Borg episode, but it didn't seem like they showed up all that often. And it's like, okay, maybe once a season or once every 2 seasons, you know, big finale or big cliffhanger episode. Okay, sure, we'll throw them in there. But now it's like, we're what'd you say? We just started season 2, or we're now I guess halfway through season 2, but we've already talked about them like 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
And maybe we hit every Kazon episode because it's that big. Okay, maybe we haven't hit every Kazon episode.
For the audience, for the audio viewing audience out there, Brent is shaking his head. No, we haven't watched all the episodes.
So I mean, that's even crazier to me that there are more Kazon episodes, and they're like the big bad. I'm like, okay, are there other bad guys? I mean,
well, I mean, to that, you've met, I think, so far 2 bad guys from the Delta Quadrant. There's the Kazon, obviously, and the Kazon have multiple sects, so you kind of keep running into them, but it's different groups of the Kazon. But there's also the Vidians.
Oh yeah,
you know, if you remember them.
Yep.
But outside of that, I mean, there's been a couple of like bad guy of the week, and then there's been like episodes where there's not really a bad guy. They're just it's just something else is happening, or intership drama or something like that.
But I guess my point being is we're running into the Kazon like we would be running into the Klingons or the Romulans or something like that, just almost casually, like every week. And it's like, but those aren't necessarily considered the big bad of the series, right? They may not be friendly all the time, but they're not like the worst of the worst.
I may have oversold the idea of the Kazon being the big bad. They're in no way, shape, or form on the level of like the Borg, Q, or the Dominion.
Well, with this episode, I think they're getting there.
And there's a couple
some
episodes
things I definitely want to discuss that happened in this episode.
Well, let's get into it as we discuss those. But Matt, before we do that, first of all, let me just say this. And I think this is a feeling that is generally shared among much of the fandom, although there are certainly exceptions to this. And I wouldn't even necessarily call this a rule, although it might be. I love Seska. I hate Kazon episodes. Seska and the Kazon go together from now on. So it's a love-hate relationship with these episodes.
That's interesting.
Yeah. I don't like the Kazon. I don't like them as a people. And it's not even like because of how they're portrayed. Like, I just don't like Kazon episodes. They're
okay. Do you like Seska though?
Yes.
But like Seska, you love the character, or you love how the actress is portraying Seska, or like what?
I love Seska. Like, I love to hate her. Like, it's kind of almost like a Kai Wynn type sort of thing, or maybe even like a
I just hate Kai Wynn, so
sure. It's like I mean, almost like a Dolores Umbridge kind of a way. Like, I love it's a cool character. It's a great character. I love how she's portrayed. I forget the name of the actress who played Umbridge in the movie. Here's your Harry Potter reference, folks. Imelda something. Staunton, thank you. Like, Matt, you would agree, she played that role to perfection.
Absolutely.
And was absolutely amazing. And you could watch her play that role.
It's one of those things that I kind of like never want to meet her in person, because she's probably a lot nicer in person, but I would just want to punch her in the face.
Yeah. And you don't ever want to see her in a different role. You don't want to see her in a different role playing something completely different, because that's who she is.
Unless she's in Star Trek with a ton of makeup and she changes her voice.
There you go.
But yeah.
There you go. So that's how I feel about Martha Hackett playing Seska. Obviously I don't like Seska. But I love how smart she is. I love how she is, the way that Anthony DeLongos, who's the guy who plays Cullen, describes Martha is he said, she's obviously the power behind the throne, but at the same time, you get the idea in this episode that she's sort of swimming among sharks and she still has to be really careful, but she's still manipulating and kind of, she's the one in charge of a lot of this stuff. So I really enjoy, I love Seska episodes, because I think she's a fantastic villain. And I think it's probably the best word to describe her. She's a fantastic villain.
Yeah, I would think so.
I just personally don't like the Kazon. I don't like their little dog chew toy.
Yeah, I know you've mentioned those guys multiple times. I guess that doesn't bother me so much.
Yeah. So anyway, let's get into it. Character actor spotlight for today. Oh, there is none this week, Matt. So let's jump right into the episode. I want to know what you think. We typically do this by talking about the A plot, by talking about the B plot, if there was a B plot. Sometimes I'm finding the episodes we're doing don't have very often don't have B plots.
I feel I've been getting better at kind of separating at least what they thought was the B plot, even if it does tie in. Like I'm starting to separate my notes that way.
Okay.
And so I actually have some notes in the B plot.
Great. Let's do that. But we've decided we like starting with specific plot points and character changes and points. So Matt, I'll turn the floor over to you, my friend. You apparently have some notes on this episode. So let's dive into it. Let's get into it. Talking about Star Trek Voyager maneuvers.
There you go. So my first question for you is about another sport that I don't know that I've heard about.
Hoverball.
Hoverball.
Yeah.
Do we know what hoverball is?
No, but we have seen it and heard it mentioned from as early as I remember is TNG.
Okay.
In an episode for people out there tracking, an episode called Captain's Holiday, where the ball goes flying past Captain Picard's head when he's on vacation. That's as early as I remember hoverball being mentioned, but it will continue to be mentioned throughout the run of Voyager. I think is it fair to say they dive into it? I think they might just reference it a lot, kind of like they did in this. I don't know that we ever really get to see hoverball.
Okay. Because I mean, like other games like Domjot and stuff like that, they actually kind of show.
Right. And
like I think you said, people have kind of replicated over time and been able to at least come up with some form of rules for, and I mean, maybe people have done that for hoverball too, but I'm just curious if we knew it was like similar to some sport I knew, but yeah, just curious about that. So, Seska comes back.
Seska's back.
And I hate to admit it, but it's been a while since we've been at Voyager. So that definitely did not help me.
Right.
Because I'm like, I recognize the name and she obviously made some references. It's like, you should know who I am. Right. She's like, I'm restoring my Cardassian physiology. I'm like, why would you be doing that? And so I scrolled back through my notes and like, oh, like 2 episodes ago, I should have remembered that. But you see, in our grand timeline, it was like 8 episodes ago or something.
Yeah.
And
and can you imagine for the first time watchers? So the last time we saw Seska was Voyager season 1. I want to say it was episode 12 or somewhere around there.
Sure.
Right. Maybe even earlier than that. Might have been like episode 8. Like it was pretty early in the run where they hit this. So we went through the rest of season 1, which admittedly was a short season, only got to 16 episodes. Went through the entire off season. Went through the first 9 episodes of Voyager and all the Deep Space Nine episodes that went along with it. And now we're coming back to Seska. So you might have had that same similar feeling. And my gosh, if you missed that episode, State of Flux back in season 1, and you're watching this episode, you
just
have
missed
no
that
idea
1 week. Yeah, exactly. And so I'm glad I went back and had notes and it's like, oh yeah, okay. And then she escaped and I got it. And she's with these guys. Got it. Okay. So I was on board there. I didn't feel so bad. I'm glad I had it in my notes. Because otherwise I'd have to kind of ask you, I'm like, so what did you forget to tell me? Who I should know? But okay, all good.
Right.
All
and
good.
the important note about Seska is she was a Maquis crew member who was a Bajoran, who turns out she actually wasn't Bajoran. She was a Cardassian who was posing as a Bajoran.
Yes, which makes for the fantastic line later in the episode. When they mention, well, yeah, but the Kazon have never had an advisor with Cardassian, Maquis, and Starfleet tactical experience. Like, you make a good point. In any case, yeah, Seska is the worst. I mean, I guess that goes in line with what you're saying, especially when you make an Umbridge reference. Umbridge is the worst. Seska is the worst. And I got to the point in this episode, it's like, she's just too devious. Like, no one should ever trust her. And like, they keep giving us these moments during the episode. It's like, well, should we believe this? She said this, but she might be doing this. I'm like, no, just don't trust her. Do not trust her. Do not trust anything she says. Don't do it. Don't do it. So this will be fun going forward, I'm sure. I'm assuming we see more Seska. Like, I mean, because we were talking before, like, okay, Kazon, big bad. Well, now Seska with the Kazon, that's not going to be good.
Right.
Like, they just, if you didn't think they could get worse, they just did. Yeah. I mean, yeah. I don't know who had this planned or whose genius idea it was to put them together, but wow. Like, I didn't think things could get this bad this quickly when she left with them. Because I mean, she kind of seemed like, you know, second in command and just following orders, and like she didn't seem all that bad. She seemed upset when she left. She didn't like how things were being run on this side of things, so she left. Fine, whatever. I didn't think she was going to become ringleader. Hey, man. And then when they pointed out like all the information she has, like that's where she gets dangerous.
Yeah, there's a great Seska episode later, like much later in the series, that we will most likely have to do as an extra viewing, and I will probably point that to you as an extra viewing. Like I'll definitely give it to you, but like when we come up with our extra viewing episodes that we do for Patreon, like I'll probably say like, hey, do this one. Like I don't know that I can justify it in the main one, but it's such a great. You talk about how obvious Seska is. Oh my god, it's so good. Anyway, yes, carry on.
Then the rest of the stuff I have for characters, I don't really think we need to discuss anything here. Is mostly me making notes of new characters, and in case I need to make further notes about them later. But I was going to ask when we get to meet all of the other heads of the sects, when they come together, they were all like, I forget how I pronounce it. Is it just Jal? Jal?
Yeah.
Is that a title or a name, or like they all had it, or he addressed them that way at least?
Yeah. So there's an episode that you missed. It's actually the second episode, and I'm going to give this to you as an extra viewing episode later. But it was like the second episode of the season called Initiation. And the whole point of that episode was you have a young Kazon who is trying to earn like his Kazon warrior name that he has to get by like making a capture and a kill, and it turns out to be Chakotay. Now it has nothing to do with this episode. It has nothing to do with Seska or anything like that. And actually that young Kazon is played by Aaron Eisenberg, who also plays Nog over on Series 9. Fantastic role. Fantastic role. You talk about one of the best acting jobs you'll ever see out of Aaron Eisenberg. It really was one of them. It's truly fantastic. It's probably one of the most loved Kazon episodes, maybe the most loved Kazon episode out of people, because it's such a great episode, but it's not one that could fit in this run. And go check out the Charting the Course episode that we had out last week with Trek Lad, and you guys find out why, because we had a big discussion of that. But anyway, so yeah, basically it's this is your, like, you're a man now. Like you've gone through your whatever their rite of passage is, and you get that name, that Jal, whatever.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. But I think that's about all I need to discuss there.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about, well, you mentioned the B plot. Now I didn't separate out the two plots here or any of the plots. So what did you have as the B plot? I think we tend to find we tackle that first and then talk about the rest of the episode.
Sure,
what did you have as the B plot?
That's worked. So the B plot, I had basically Chakotay dealing with his feelings, because that seemed a little bit separate, like especially when like he because we would go to like the bridge and they would interact with the Kazon and Seska, and then we cut away to Chakotay, and like from the beginning, when the notes are made was like Chakotay is going to have a tough time dealing with this, and then sure enough they address it. It's like he thinks Seska is all his fault, and like B'Elanna tries to talk him out of it, and you know, just write it off as, well, yeah, you have lousy taste in women, but this isn't all your fault. I'm like, okay, so and sure enough, like I said, they just kept coming back to him, and it's like, so it wasn't a huge thing, and like I said, you could easily lump this in with the main plot, but that's kind of how I felt they were going about it.
Okay, so what about it? What about Chakotay? Chakotay in his feels. I like it. What about it?
Like we said, it's been a while since I've seen Voyager, and jumping back and forth between the series, I always kind of have to like reacclimate myself with some of the characters. And so I'm not sure if we've seen a lot of this from Chakotay before, like if I've seen too much of this side of him before.
Okay.
But it was very well played out in the episode, because like I said, from the very beginning, I knew he was going to have a tough time dealing with this. Just like the look on his face, the music that was playing, whatever it was. And he has a great sense of nobility. I think that's the best way I can explain it. And like he always has to live up to a certain standard, and like he takes things very personally, as we see. Like even if it wasn't necessarily his fault, it's like he this is almost the reverse of everything we've been talking about in other recent episodes in DS9, like Dax being held responsible for her previous host's crimes, or the episode after that when we who was it? Because I compared it to that episode as well, where they're trying to hold people responsible for somebody else's actions, whereas here Chakotay is basically holding himself responsible for someone else's actions.
Right.
And it's like, no, you don't need to do that. That's not your fault. And it's like, okay, yes, you had feelings for her. Yes, you were her mentor in some senses, but you can't be responsible for everything she does.
Yeah.
Especially when she decides to turn her back on everybody on this side of things and say, hey, no, I'm going to be actively fighting against you. Like,
okay, so here's a question for you though. I want to bounce that back to you.
Sure.
Did she really turn her back on them? Because don't forget, like, who she really was a Cardassian spy infiltrating the Maquis. You know what I mean? Posing as a Bajoran. That's who she is.
That's fair. That's fair. But that's not how Chakotay is seeing it.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So I like, that's why it's hitting him so hard. Because we did when we last saw her, I think Chakotay had that moment. It's like, he was working with a ship full of spies. Like, no one was loyal to him. No one was actually there to really help him. They're all just there for information or to sabotage things and then get out. And so I think he's struggling with all this. And I think he wants, like, I think you're right though. Like, he needs to see it for what it is. And I don't know who's going to be like, they tried in this episode, definitely. Like, if anybody's going to get through to him, it'd be B'Elanna, right?
Right.
I mean, maybe eventually Janeway, but I don't think, I almost wonder if Janeway doesn't have enough information. Like, she needs to be briefed on this situation so she can just step in and maybe do something about it. Or like, they need Deanna Troi. Troy needs to be on the ship right now.
Yeah.
Like that Chakotay needs to go see Troy. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah. And they talk about that. I mean, what they don't have here is a ship's counselor. Like they do say that occasionally, like they're missing a ship's counselor here on Voyager. They don't have that benefit. I mean, the doctor is kind of the closest thing that they really have to a counselor,
which is weird when the doctor isn't a person.
Right. But he has the downloaded medical training. But counseling training, does he? Does that count as medical? I mean, they could just sort of download it into his subroutines. So
I mean, I guess if they have that training available, yeah. Sure.
But you also know his bedside manner is awesome. So.
I mean, I was surprised how considerate almost B'Elanna seemed in this situation, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, I can't see the doctor being any better. But so I mean, that's where we're at with Chakotay, and I kind of wonder how long this is going to affect him. And like said, like if Seska keeps reappearing, I can't imagine it gets better. It's just gonna reopen old wounds every time.
Chakotay's got his personal thing to settle with, hey, let's fast forward to the end of the episode. It gets real personal.
Yeah.
Real personal.
Was not expecting that. And I mean, okay, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but
of course, I'm sorry for people out there. What we're talking about is that Seska took some DNA from Chakotay and impregnated herself with, and she's pregnant with Chakotay's child.
I'm like, okay, I don't know if this is just to make it TV friendly, or if this is them saying, oh, in the future we have better technology. But it just seemed weird. It's like, I have your DNA. Wait, how do you impregnate yourself with just DNA? And like, when I hear DNA, I hear like skin sample or hair follicles or something like that.
I was thinking it's funny. I always think of hair follicles. Like she just snaps him his hair, like, plucked out his hair and then somehow used that.
How do you impregnate yourself with hair?
Yeah. I've never thought that it was the other thing.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I mean. Like, I don't know, like if they're just trying to keep it network TV friendly, and that's what they had to do to get away with it, or if they're trying to imply in the future, we just need DNA and we can do it. There you go.
I think it's the latter. That's the way I've honestly always assumed, is just all they need is literally just a bit of DNA and they can figure it out and get happen.
And that's scary.
Yeah.
that they can replicate humans with just DNA.
Right.
But yeah, that could, if this goes through, if this pans out, if she's not lying, because at this point, by the end of the episode in particular, it could all be just a big mind game. I would not put that past Seska.
Nor should you.
Yeah.
Nor should
Like I said, do not trust anything Seska says.
Right.
You can't trust it. I mean, you can't ignore it, but you can't trust it.
Right.
Seska's the worst. But yeah, does that about cover the B plot for you?
Sure. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, I think it's, if that's really where you're going to go down to, you mentioned something earlier about, sure, Chakotay is her mentor, but he can't be responsible for her. And okay, maybe if this is like a Star Trek message, I don't know that this is a Star Trek message, but this is a life lesson that I have personally had to learn and that I teach my children. And that actually, for some reason, I wound up talking to this about my kids. I also coach my kids' baseball team, and that provides a lot of opportunities for teaching life lessons as well. And
Sure.
I got into talking to them about that. You know, I was like, look, you can't control other people's responses. It's that simple thing. Like you are not responsible for their choices. So just don't do it just because you know that they're going to make a bad choice. Like, you're not responsible for what they do. They are still responsible for how they react and how they respond. And Chakotay didn't know what was going to happen, and he really shouldn't hold himself responsible. And honestly, it forces him, or it doesn't force him, but he makes the choice that honestly is a really bad choice.
Yeah.
To disobey direct orders, he stole a shuttle and went over there. Now, he was doing it from a noble heart and like from a noble standpoint, but it was the wrong thing to do. And he abused his power. Yeah.
This is what I kind of pulled out as a Star Trek message from this episode. Okay. What was, I'm pretty sure it was Janeway near the end. What you did was commendable. The way you did it was not.
Right.
And then, I mean, she went on a little bit selfishly. You set a terrible example, and on a personal level, you made my job more difficult. Like, okay, fine. I'm glad that was kind of just, not your main point there. But yeah, I mean, I think that line is the perfect line. What you did was commendable. The way you did it was not. Like, I understand why you did what you did, but don't do it that way.
Can't do it.
Shouldn't have done it that way. And I just got done discussing the differences between Kirk and Picard on a different podcast. And this plays into so much. Like, there's a reason I would not want Chakotay as my captain right now if he's going to pull stuff like this.
Right.
Like, that's not what I want to see. Because I think it was Janeway again says, or someone at some point said, how would losing the first officer affect this crew?
Yeah.
Like, that's what you got to think about. I mean, it's one thing when you're back in the Alpha Quadrant and you lose a crew member, you get a replacement. Fine. Out here in Delta Quadrant, who's going to replace you? How is it going to affect the crew? Let's think about this a little bit more. Like, you got to be doubly careful. You're already down men and women, down crew members. We've talked about that before. They're like 2/3 of where they should be, maybe. Like, you can't just go willy-nilly run on your own missions because you have the power to.
Yeah.
Because you're feeling guilty.
I thought it was an interesting comparison to the Alpha Quadrant where, like, yeah, look, if something happens to you in the Alpha Quadrant, we can just pick up somebody else. That's not counting just the emotional stress of what it is to lose your first officer on a ship. Like, yeah, great. We got another new first officer, but I mean, we got a new manager. Are you kidding? Like, who's this guy? What's going to happen? Where's it? Like, yeah, we got the replacement.
If it does affect other parts of the crew, like, you can replace them too. Like, that's what I'm saying. You could replace the entire crew. It's like, okay, this has been too much for the crew. You need to go home. You guys are on leave. We're going to send out a different crew with the ship now. Like, you could do that. Fine, whatever. But yeah, out here in Delta, no. Yeah. Like, everybody you run into is trying to kill you.
Yeah.
Like, we can't split up right now. We can't replace you. Like, we can't just go to like Kazon and say, hey, you got any first officers over there? We could use like that. Yeah, right. I mean, you just lost Seska.
And Matt, I mean, to me, that goes back to something that changed with me when I became a father. It didn't happen when I became a husband, but it did when I became a father. Of like, these little kids depend on me now. You know what I mean? Like it's a thing that changed in me when that happened. Like, I actually matter to these kids. Like, I matter, not just my presence. Like, sure. I matter to this family, and I've got to stay here. And what I didn't realize is that I mattered to this family long before they were ever kids.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I don't think I ever realized how important I was to my family. And I think I never thought about this watching this episode until this moment while we're discussing this, but I think that's a great piece of this is, wherever you are, whatever level you're at, you're important to your family. You're important to whatever your community is, whatever group of people, like they need you there, not just somebody to fill your shoes, but they need you in that spot. And Chakotay, like just going off half cocked doing his own thing was not okay.
No, like it wouldn't have been okay in a perfect situation.
Right.
It would not have been okay if they were in the Alpha Quadrant, but it's really not okay here because they're in such a more dire situation.
I mean, and let's face it, if Chakotay was the first officer of any other ship, except for maybe the Enterprise, he would have been thrown in the brig or had his rank stripped from him.
Yep.
Been demoted, because we know that nothing's going to happen to Riker, Data, or Worf or any of those guys. People,
sure,
they can do whatever. They're never going to get demoted or have anything bad happen to them. Even Riker, when he wound up in the brig, Picard still came and sprung him from the pokey a couple hours later.
Yeah.
So, which, by the way, the episode writer for this, which was a guy named Ken Biller. We've talked about him a little bit before, Matt. You probably don't remember him, but it's okay. We'll talk about Ken Biller. He's the guy that just sort of like does everything in the production. Like he starts as like just a little script supervisor and eventually winds up running the whole show. And he kind of does everything in between over the course of the run. Well, he wrote this episode, and he originally wrote this with Chakotay getting thrown in the brig or having some sort of big discipline. And the producers were like, no, we can't do that to Chakotay. He's a main cast member. You're not allowed to do that. And basically they went around and rewrote the ending because they couldn't have that happen.
They talk about it a few times in the episode, like when B'Elanna's making her case with Janeway.
Yeah.
Like she has a whole scene about that. It's like, and Janeway finally breaks it down and it's like, okay, so what you're saying is you don't want me to punish your friend. Okay. Well, right now we need to fix the situation first. And like, then she, went back to captain mode, and it's like, we'll get to the discipline later, but we need to go get him first. Otherwise it's not going to matter.
All right, Matt. So I think that's the B plot. What do you got for the, let's talk about the main plot.
Yeah.
Kazon ship appears out of nowhere. They bust in. I mean, send a kamikaze starship right into the cargo bay 2, which by the way is really fun. We'll talk about that in a moment. They steal a piece of Kazon, of Federation technology. Oh, turns out it's Maj Kala. Oh wait, Seska's there. They go back and forth on whether or not they should go get it. Chakotay steals a runabout or not. That's these fishing. Chakotay steals a shuttle, goes over there to try to go get it. He gets captured. Bad stuff happens. They eventually get him rescued. They get their stuff back. Seska's got a little bit of Chakotay's DNA, and everybody goes on their way.
Yeah.
Talk to us about that.
So the very first thing we get is they're being hailed by a Federation signal. My question is, how hard is that to fake? Right.
I would not argue with that, except for the fact that we're in the Delta Quadrant and Voyager is the only Federation ship over there.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like, not everybody has all these interactions with the Federation all the time. Like, they're literally the only ship out there. So you see another Federation ship, you've got to go check it out, right?
You got to investigate, but at the same time, I'm like, they also know they're the only Federation ship out there, so they should be on alert. And they should also know, like, Seska's out there, right? Like, yeah, it was, I mean, in their time, maybe a few months ago, but they should, that should be right. If you're on the main crew of this ship, if you're Janeway, that should always be in the back of your mind. Is like, there is someone that is from the Alpha Quadrant that is not on our side out there. And so, yeah, I mean, as they kind of start to explore in this episode, they have information, the same information that we have, basically, but they're able to use it against us now. So, I mean, that's where I think the brilliance of this episode comes in. And I'm excited to see where it goes. I still don't like Seska,
right?
But I like the idea that the ideas that they're bringing in. So the Kazon, like we started to discuss them before, and like I know that you don't like the Kazon,
right?
But I kind of do.
Say it, Matt.
I kind of do. It's
of course you
it's do. Like they're ruthless, but they're innovative.
Okay.
Like, I love that they're always out to learn. They're always out to try something new. Like, we've talked about them stealing technology before.
Mm-hmm.
And like we've seen in other episodes, like I've always wondered why things like this don't happen more often, just like beaming onto someone else's ship. I'm like, especially without them being prepared, like just go. I mean, if you're the bad guys, why aren't you doing that every day? Like, if no one can stop you, if you can get in and out, like just go. Like, okay, ships don't always have their shields up.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, you got all this stuff going on. But the Kazon, like saying, they're, well, I mean, the word you use, kamikaze, right? They are willing to sacrifice a few lives. I don't know if they actually had to sacrifice any lives, but it feels like maybe I could see someone dying in that crash.
Sure.
But they had this planned out to a T.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that like their plan went off without a hitch is scary. I mean, that was Seska against the entire crew of Voyager.
Right.
And she anticipated every single move with whatever limited technology the Kazon have for now. Because I mean, they're just trying to steal more to catch up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's scary that they can already do that just with a little bit of information.
Right.
And so, yeah, if they ever actually do get their hands on more technology, like they're kind of trying and failing at this point, which I don't know how to take that yet, but I don't think that'll stop them from trying again. Like they're going to keep coming. They know the technology's out there. They know it's really awesome. They're going to keep coming.
I'm glad you like them, Matt. I really am. I don't, but that's okay. First of all, I've always talked about the point of this show is to get people beamed up into the fandom. And in this case, it's you because you're the guy sitting on the other side of the microphone from me. But everybody's fandom is their own fandom.
Sure.
Like yours is going to be different than mine, and that's okay. You know what I mean? Like that's the thing about it. So if you like these guys, that's awesome, man. That's cool. I like it. I dig it. I'm all for it.
Yeah. I definitely want to see what they come up with over time and how they keep trying. And like, even if they keep failing, cool. But I have a feeling sometime they're going to succeed. They are going to get more technology and or develop it themselves somehow. I mean, just like, can they steal the blueprints for it? Like, were they the ones before that tried to steal the replicator? So I mean, like,
no, wait, that was this episode. That's the Federation technology they stole here was a replicator. Or no, was it a transporter? No, you're right. I think it was. Yeah, you're right.
But the previous one, I think maybe was that the one where Seska went over?
Yeah,
was when they tried to steal a replicator.
She was trying to give them a replicator. I think.
Yeah,
it was. Yeah. You're right. You're right.
So I mean, like, if they have the replicator technology, could they just? Is a replicator capable of replicating a transporter module?
It would be, yeah, if they know how to program it to do so.
So they would still need the programmed information.
It would, but to Janeway's point though, a replicator though, forgetting all the other technology, will significantly alter the balance of power in at least that sector of the quadrant.
Yeah,
because like if water is a scarce resource, now
exactly.
You have unlimited water.
That was the first thing we learned with the Kazon. It's like, oh yeah, we'll give you like these 3 big buckets of water, and it's like, no, we want the replicator. We want water forever.
Want the thing that made the water.
Yeah. So I get that, and I understand that, and I love that they keep making a big point of that new technology can cause huge problems in this quadrant. Like we can't just give it to them. Like I mean, I always struggle when I should use, the words prime directive, but it does that kind of play into that? Like why Absolutely. They can't give them that technology?
Absolutely. That's
okay.
Prime directive. Absolutely. Okay. Yeah.
So
because you can't interfere in the natural development of a civilization.
Exactly.
Giving them your technology is that interference.
Okay. Giving them the technology is. So the question is though, them stealing it. I mean, I guess you need to try to prevent that because that's what you should do. But if they would actually get their hands on it and get away with it, like that's how they work. That's how they adapt and they how they learn new skills. Is by taking from others and learning how to use it and integrating into their own systems. Like that's how their civilization works.
Right.
So, I mean, that's kind of within the realm of the Prime Directive, you could argue, I think.
I think you're doing some dancing on that, Matt, but that is the debate. I don't think the Prime Directive is perfect. And by the way, what happens? I always argue, what happens when the shoe is flipped? What happens when we, as the Starfleet crew, need somebody else's technology and they say no?
Yeah.
But it's going to make such a big difference. And how do you respond to then? And that is a great, I love those episodes because they do come up from time to time. And it's a great examination. And it's that great moral quandary because there's always somebody who wants to just say, yeah, screw the Prime Directive, screw whatever they say, let's go get it because we need it. And then there's the other person who's like, actually, if we're shoes on the other foot, we wouldn't give it to somebody else. So we shouldn't go take it from them either. So, and it's a great debate. It makes for a great episode, you know?
But I think the biggest reason why I liked this episode was to see the chess match that was set up between Chakotay and Siska. It was always who is one step ahead of the other.
Right.
And they were always trying to get ahead of the other one, but it's like, well, how far ahead did they actually plan? Did they know that I would know, that you would know, that I would know? Like, it was that whole sequence, right?
Right. Because
they're like, yeah, this plan went off perfectly, but she left a trail. Well, okay, she left the trail on purpose, but now we know she left the trail on purpose, so we can plan for it. And it was this whole thing, and it's like, okay, you got my attention. Where's this going? And I love to see that stuff play out. But then, of course, instead of utilizing everyone's brain power, Chakotay decides to just take things into his own hands.
Okay, Matt, let me ask you this. One of the beauties of Voyager that I think Voyager does better than either Deep Space Nine or Next Generation, kind of back to the way the original series used to. It puts you in a situation and makes you ask the question, what would you do if you were in that situation? I think there's two of those in this episode. There's Janeway's at the end. Well, what would you do? Do you discipline your first officer that you need? You can't just sit him in the brig for the next 70 years. You can't get rid of him. You actually need him on the ship. Or do you just let him go? But the other one is, I think, this moment with Chakotay. What do? Your ex-girlfriend, your ex whatever has duped you so thoroughly and is effectively rubbing your face in it, and now has stolen technology from your ship, which your Prime Directive you have to protect, but you don't want to get everybody else in danger either. So what do? What does Matt do in that moment? Do you do what Chakotay did?
I wouldn't have the guts to do what Chakotay did, I don't think. I've always said, I like Picard's approach better, right? Mm-hmm. There's got to be another option. It's like, you don't like the option where the bad guys win. You don't like the option where we all die. There's got to be another option. Mm-hmm. And so in that moment where he needs to make a decision, like, I honestly don't know what I would do. Pretty sure I wouldn't fly off by myself, but like, I fast forward to the end of this when they're all back, and like, the other decision, right? You asked what Janeway should have done. Mm-hmm. Like, yes, you need the first officer, but he can't get away with zero punishment.
Right. And
so I don't know what her options are exactly, but like she mentions, I'm putting you on a report in case that means anything anymore. Mm-hmm. But like, he needs something stripped, like whether it's just some privilege he has on the ship as first officer, or I don't know if it would make, I mean, well, no, he doesn't even have pips on his collar, does he?
Not technically, but I mean, he's his rank is commander.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, like, I'm just thinking something, even if it's temporary or just some like visual way to almost like shame him. Like that. I mean, I know it sounds bad, but like, the rest of the crew needs to know that this is not okay and this will not be tolerated. Like, there
needs to be some sort of discipline, not just oh, you've disappointed. Like, you're right.
And that's what I mean. It
right.
Can't just be a private conversation and, oh, you're the first officer again.
Yeah.
Like
that. This was the episode writer. This was his whole big problem with this episode. He loved it all the way up to that point, and he's like, no, something has to happen to him. Something significant. Some sort of discipline has to happen, and it didn't. And he always felt they dropped the ball on that, and that they should have done something different. I get the producers' quandary.
Yeah, I get the producers' side of it too, from a long-term show perspective. Yeah. Yes, I get it. But I think you can come up with something, even if it seems kind of petty for now.
He loses, I mean, within their world, there's certain things they could have. He loses replicator rations. He loses holodeck time. He loses.
Exactly. Like he needs to be stripped of some privilege or, I mean, or I would argue, and, you know, maybe he does sit in the brig for a week. I mean, not like 70 years, like you were saying, or until they get back to the Alpha Quadrant or whatever, but like just something. Yeah. And it's like, okay, whoever's next up, I not well enough versed in this crew yet to think who that might be, but
it'd be Tuvok.
Okay, so
Tuvok is the second officer.
Yeah, so like Tuvok would step up into his role for a week.
Yeah,
there you go. That's how crews work.
I mean, instead of putting him in the brig, you at least confine him to quarters. I don't know that he necessarily wants to be in the brig. I will. Yeah, I confine him. I don't know. Oddly, I'm more comfortable with confining him in quarters than I am throwing him in because the brig. Well, first of all, the brig requires a certain amount of security, and that's resources that the ship honestly just doesn't really have. Confine him to his quarters, lock the door. He's fine. He's not going.
Well, as long as you make sure he's actually locked in there, because look what happened last time. They just left him alone on the ship. He figured out a way to steal a shuttle without anybody knowing about it.
Very true. I agree with you.
Which I'm very glad that they addressed, because that was my first thing. I'm like, how in the world did no one notice that he left? Like when she, you know, asked the computer, like tries to comm badge him. Okay, fine. Then asks the computer where he is, and he's not on the ship. I'm like, how did no one know about this? And then they had that conversation walking down the hallway. It's like, okay, they're addressing it. I'm not crazy. Right. Good. Someone should have known.
Yeah, someone should have known. He's my key.
Yeah.
I mean, you have certainly all those issues.
So I do think I want to discuss a little bit of Seska's interaction with the Kazon.
Okay.
Like we kind of get to see a little bit of behind the scenes here.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned briefly, like she is kind of in charge, but kind of watching her back the entire time. And it's a weird dynamic over there.
Yeah.
Like a really weird dynamic. Like she's in charge and like she gives orders, but they all still kind of check with Kala, and it's like, yeah, do it. And I mean, there's a few, actually, I don't know if there ever was an instance, like I kept expecting them to just follow her orders, but then they like always seem to hesitate. And I'm wondering if there was one time near the end when they did actually just take orders. I forget if there was or not, but yeah, they always seem to, you know, double check, and it's like, she always gets her way. And then she, like, when she oversteps, right, and calls the other tribes or sects, I always want to call them tribes, but and she tells Kala, it's like, you did what? Like he's all like, oh yeah, this is a great plan. It's like, you started already? What have you done? Like that was too much. That was too far. And like a switch flips in his head. Like all this time he's like, okay, I can work with this. So it's like, no, you do not do that. Yeah. And that kind of made me wonder, like I think it made me help me understand a little bit the relationship between the different sects. Like Neelix kind of, was it Neelix that was on Voyager talking about it, and how like they never come together peacefully.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like, this is super weird if that's what's going on. And it's like, I mean, I don't know that Voyager still even knows what was going on with the sects and why they were there and why they weren't just blowing each other to smithereens. So that's an interesting twist that may or may not come up again.
So just to make sure we put a real big pinpoint on that, the Kazon are very much a male-driven society.
Sure.
You know, and I forget if it's in this episode or if maybe I'm confusing with another episode, but they talk about, oh, Maj, you're letting your female speak or your woman speak for you. Like it's almost, it's not quite as bad as the Ferengi, but it's almost that bad. Like, oh, how could you let a woman tell you what to do? How could you let a woman, you know? So where I think Maj Kala can hear Seska, know that what she's saying is right. He, even among his own crew, there's a little bit of the battle for pride for him, but it's at least among his own crew. It's at least among his own sect. When she starts putting him on blast effectively, like she's overstepping her bounds, like she is speaking for him to the other sects who he is against.
Yeah, but I think she did say like she put his name on the message, right?
Right. But he,
So I mean,
that was definitely overstepping on her part.
I mean, it was definitely overstepping, but I don't know that the other sex necessarily would have known that she sent it from what I think I understood of it. It sounded more like it was probably like some sort of written message and signed with his name. So like, it looks like he sent it.
Yeah, but I love the description that like I said, Anthony DeLongis, I referenced it earlier, where he's like, she's definitely the power behind the throne. She's not the one in charge, but she's kind of the one pulling the string. But at the same time, if she's not careful, she'd be in a lot. He said she's swimming among sharks. Like she's got to be real careful.
She's just testing the waters.
Sure.
Right. Sure. She's like a 2-year-old.
Yeah.
We're pushing boundaries and seeing, okay, how far can I go? And she found a limit for sure.
Right.
And now she knows, but at the same time, she's still there and she's still pretty much in charge, even though she did go past the boundary.
Sure.
So that tells you something too.
So
it wasn't, they didn't completely exile her for going out of bounds. Like they didn't use the transporter on her. Because I mean, easily could have done that, right?
They might wish they should have at some point.
So I mean, that's going to be super interesting going forward, because like they need her, because it seems like she is the only reason that they talked about like they can integrate the Federation technology with their technology. So I don't know if it was actually easy, but they can actually do it now because of her. Right. Which is scary. And I mean, if they want more of the technology, I mean, they don't even know all the technology that exists on Voyager probably. But if they want it, they're going to need her help consistently, I think, to get it and integrate it. So maybe this is a minor thing, but a little bit later when Chakotay is on board, like he snuck on board and like he's being interrogated. Kala or one of his men shoot him up with something, I'm assuming, kind of truth serum thingy, make him speak a little bit more freely, right? And then they're about to give him a break. Like, I'll be back in an hour and you better tell us blah, 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 blah. Then Seska like shoots him up again. Or is that when she's like stealing DNA? Is that what that's supposed to be? No,
I think she's shooting him up again, and she takes his DNA later. Yeah.
Okay. So when she shot up him again, my question was, did that like save his life or did that hurt him more? Like, at least what did you take that as?
I don't think I ever thought about it that much, but if I had to lean one way or the other, I would say it was more saving his life, because she's not trying to get rid of Chakotay. She very much wants Chakotay around. It's a part of her big plan, right?
And that's kind of what I wondered. Like, was that like the antidote to the first thing they shot him up with, or was this okay? Yeah, the second dose of this, and you're going to talk. Well, like I wasn't sure. They didn't really just explain it or elaborate. She just like stuck another needle in him, and like, okay.
And I mean, that could have been when she was taking his DNA, like that could be what that was inferring to be. And she said it later.
I've never thought about it.
Yeah, I've never thought about that particular moment. Like,
but I think if I recall, like, I think she does like plunge her down, not up. Right. So it implied that she's putting something in him, not taking something out. So, but once again, as Chakotay's there, even when he's like drugged up, he's still playing this chess match that I was talking about earlier. Like, he's made it this far and now he's involving Kala. Right. And I love how he starts to plant seeds of doubt in Kala's mind about Seska.
Sure.
Like, this is a master move right here. Like, it's basically his only move. He knows he can't win. He knows the only thing Kala actually wants is this information. And so I thought it was super interesting to see him play it this way and try to get him to turn on Seska too. So once again, it'll be very interesting to see. Like, I kind of want to see another Seska episode to see where Seska and Kala stand and where that relationship is going to go. See if Kala continues to let her run the show, or if he takes more of an upper hand and like, no, you are second in command and you're going to stay there. Because I mean, even second in command on that ship, I mean, like you were saying, women aren't really highly regarded in that culture. So even giving her that position,
yeah, she would never really have a position on that ship. Like she'd be there, but
yeah,
she wouldn't have.
I mean, she's like an advisor.
Mm-hmm.
Like I get it, but I mean, like you said, she. What was the phrase you used? The power behind the throne or whatever.
Yeah, she's the power behind the throne, but she's swimming with sharks.
Yeah. So I mean, eventually, as they do in Star Trek, they figure out a way to foil everybody's plans. Everything goes back to basically normal, basically how we started. But it definitely opened up a can of worms.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just, we weren't just left with, oh, Seska's gone.
Mm-hmm.
We're now left with, oh, Seska is actively helping, aiding, and possibly leading the Kazon against Voyager.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I don't know what you were thinking. Like, we usually say if you can explain what happens in an episode in 30 seconds or less, we're good to go. If you tried to give me an explanation, say, yeah, Seska's back and she's, if you just gave me the episode and then said Seska's back, she's leading the Kazon and she's pregnant with Chakotay's baby, I'm like, what? We didn't watch this episode?
Yep,
but
exactly.
Like, I mean, you could give me that, but I would have a lot of questions.
Right.
A lot of questions.
Yeah. So that's why we watched it, Matt. You know, we get to this point of the episode and I go, did you like this episode? Did you understand why it was part of our run? And would you watch it again? That's why it was part of our run. That's why in the end analysis, this episode had to be in.
Yeah. I agree.
As you may have guessed,
what I'm saying.
As you may have guessed, it factors into future episodes. So
I should hope so. I should hope they don't start this up here and it's like, maybe we don't like that storyline. I like that storyline. I want to see where it goes.
I love the Seska storyline. I really love the Seska storyline. So
I enjoyed this episode.
All right. Listen, awesome. That is freaking awesome. And I'm glad that you liked it, man. I'm glad that you liked it. I'm glad that you kind of like the Kazon. I'm glad it seems like you're kind of with me on the whole Seska thing too. It seems like, am I reading that right?
Seska's the worst. I don't know if I 100% feel the way you do, but
yeah.
I think we can agree Seska's the worst.
Oh, but Martha Hackett is just so perfect.
I don't know if I'm there yet. I don't know if I'm there yet.
Fair enough. All right, Matt. Well, would you like to know what we're doing next week?
That would be useful.
It's been a good episode this week, but we've got to continue to move on. We're actually going to jump back over to Deep Space Nine. We're doing a double episode next week, Matt. It's not a part 1 and part 2, or at least not on the titles, but they are certainly connected. Homefront and Paradise Lost. You will want to watch them together. They are one story, Homefront and Paradise Lost. Now, I do have a slew of extra viewing episodes. We skipped a whole bunch of episodes, so I got to give these to you as we go. You ready? All right, the first one I'm going to give you is Initiations. That's the one I talked to you earlier about with the young Kazon trying to earn his Kazon name. Doesn't really have anything to do with the overall Kazon Seska thing. It's just a Kazon episode with Chakotay. The next episode I want to tell you about is one called Projections. This one very nearly. I love this episode. It's such a great episode. It's a doctor episode. The doctor is activated to find the ship empty, and things go further awry when it seems that he is actually a real person and the rest of the ship and the crew are all holograms.
Mirror universe.
Oh, and by the way, Reg Barclay, do you remember him?
Name sounds familiar, but I have no idea.
Remember the guy with the holodeck addiction back in Next Generation?
He was just brought up in the other podcast I did, and I couldn't remember who he was.
There you go, Reg Barclay. He actually turns up in this episode as part of the hologram. It's wild. Okay. It's a wild episode. It's a good, fun episode. It's a really good episode. But we just, like I said, I couldn't make it fit in our particular run. There's another episode called Cold Fire, and in this one, the crew runs in
Cold
Fire. Yeah, and the crew runs into a ship of Ocampan colonists. Remember, Ocampa is what Kess is. That's her species.
I was going to say the underground folks.
Yep.
Right?
And this particular group of colonists are more in touch with their people's psychic abilities than Kess's people were. And as a result of this episode, Kess begins to explore her latent psychic abilities with the assistance of Tuvok. That is a kind of a Kess storyline that goes through the episodes moving forward. But Kess, from now on, just so you know, Kess is developing these psychic abilities.
Well, maybe she can start to take on some of Troy's role.
Maybe. We'll see what happens with that. The next episode I got to give you, though, Matt. is called Alliances.
Okay.
Now, I will tell you, Alliances is the next episode in this Seska Kazon story arc. Although it doesn't really have a whole lot of super long-lasting ramifications, the episode itself is really good. After getting her butt beat in a battle with the Kazon, Janeway attempts to forge an alliance with some of the feuding sects of the Kazon, as well as the Kazon's former oppressors, the Trabe.
She attempts to forge your enemy.
Yeah, she attempts to forge this big, huge alliance with all of them. It's
Sure.
a little bit of a Kazon origin story.
Okay.
Like a very little bit of one, but it is that next thing. And Seska, by the way, is getting more and more pregnant. Oh, by the way, when they contacted Martha and
so she is actually pregnant.
She is actually pregnant, and so was Martha Hackett. It was a pure coincidence that Martha Hackett was pregnant right as they made Seska pregnant. The two didn't know that about each other. And Seska, like when you see her with a pregnant belly, that's because she actually is pregnant in real life. They didn't have to add that. So anyway, so that's Seska. But anyway, that's Alliances. You would probably very much enjoy that particular episode, Matt. Although again, not one for the main run, but you know, I'll give that to you. And then Matt, this is not your typical extra viewing episode I'm going to give you. This is the last one for today. Okay. It's an episode called Threshold. I will pause for the dropping of plates heard all among Trekkie fandom. Threshold is, I give this to you because you need to know about it. Okay. We talk about the lore of Star Trek, right?
Is this Voyager as well?
This is Voyager. Yeah. Threshold is often cited as the worst Star Trek episode ever.
Okay. I thought
by Brandon
they were
Braga.
Be shocked because it was a good episode.
No,
and you're like,
it's
we're
often
skipping it.
Yeah, which by the way means you'd probably love the episode, Matt. The way things tend to work. I think that is highly exaggerated. I think there are far worse episodes of Star Trek over the course of the entire series. Actually, I think the episode is pretty good right up until the very end when things go off the rails. Here's a little description of it. But anyway, sorry. The point is, the reason why this is is because if you go to conventions or you talk to people about Star Trek, you might hear them making fun of this episode.
Sure.
So this is why I give it to you as an extra viewing of, you almost have to see it to just know how wacky it goes.
You have to see it to believe it.
So here's the deal. The crew is attempting to breach the warp 10 barrier so they can get home faster.
Okay.
And they actually do it. And when Janeway and Paris go out on the test flight for it, this is where everything goes off the rails. They begin to de-evolve and they turn into space salamanders. And they have space salamander babies together. Janeway and Paris do. And eventually the crew comes in and they rescue them and re-evolve them back into the humans that they are. And they wind up abandoning their babies on this planet and just go on their merry way.
Okay.
But you're like going, what is this? Like, yeah, it's really good up till that point. And then you're like, this is just whack. Like, I've seen t-shirts that have the pictures of the two like space salamanders.
Sure.
And like, you know, if you hear jokes about Paris and Janeway mating and being horrible parents and abandoning their kids, that's what it's about. It's just oh, it's bad. Oh, it's so bad. It's so bad. But Matt, that's all the extra viewings that I have for you today here on
All right.
And with that is actually going to bring us to the end. Matt, this is one of those episodes where we go, yeah, I may not have a lot to talk about, and turns out it's a full episode, but that's cool. That's going to do it for us, guys, this week on Beam Me Up. Remember, get in touch with us. Send us, what are those called, Matt?
Emails,
reviews, so emails, all that kind of stuff. You can find all that information out there at beammeuppod.com. Matt, where can the people find you on the internet?
You can find me over on Instagram or Twitter at As a Matter of Matt.
And I'm at Brent Allen Live across all the social medias. Would love to connect with you there as well, too. Until next time, folks, live long and prosper.